If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard in Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place.
All right, everybody, please welcome to the show from Slam Wrestling and author Greg Oliver. Greg, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, guys.
Thank you. Well, we see that you have a new book coming out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the non-wrestling book? Are we allowed to talk about non-wrestling things?
It's a new project. We got to go there, right?
We talk about anything, to believe. You know, we get off track quite a bit, so it's okay to not talk about wrestling. So
it was actually very refreshing to do a non-wrestling book in many ways. So the one that just came out, I got on Friday, was it's called "Who's the Man, Billy Van," and he was an actor in the 60s and the 70s. He was on Sonny and Cher and did all kinds of different things in Canada. He was well known for The Party Game, and he was on Hilarious House of Frightenstein. So it's his biography, and I got his family's cooperation, and basically his family learned tons about him too. So from that perspective, it was really fascinating and great to learn about this guy I was a fan of. Of course, all the skills I'd built over the years doing wrestling things came in handy, right? Doing the interviews, pursuing people, learning how to hunt down people. But there wasn't a lot of wrestling overlap, whereas I found with my hockey books and the wrestling books, there's been a little bit more overlap than you would have thought. But yeah, thank you. And then coming out in the spring is a book with John Arezzi, where I go into country music and I go into baseball. So
does he talk about the Mets? Does he talk about the Mets?
He does, yeah. Well, he works
I'm happy to hear about this because I actually slightly forgot about it because I listen to his podcast all the time and I love it. You know, it brings back a lot of memories. John Arezzi's podcast, so it's a really fun project. So I'm really looking forward to that book. Andy, I know you had a question regarding this book. Did you not?
No, I just wanted to talk about the book. Being a guy from Long Island myself, being a big wrestling fan, a big Mets fan, I'm actually looking forward to this book. John, of course, put on like the first major, well-known convention on the East Coast, or at least in the Northeast. I'm not even sure what year it was. Maybe the late '80s, early '90s, and at LaGuardia Airport, I think.
Yep, '91.
Okay.
And he did 4 different conventions, and each one, well, the first 3 certainly got progressively bigger, and the 4th one was a little bit more scaled down in some ways. He also helped Herb Abrams do the one that he ran as well. That ended up he had to go fix things up with the LaGuardia Airport there because Herb Abrams stiffed them on the bill. I know you find that hard to believe.
Yeah, right.
But I really took Arezzi's project partly because, as I talked about with the Billy Van, I mean, I love writing about wrestling. I love writing about hockey, but you need to change them up sometimes. So it was really neat to learn a lot more about baseball, and the country music especially fascinating me. But I mean, it's more than just that with Arezzi. I mean, sure, he discovered Patty Loveless and Kelsey Ballerini and had a huge input into the career of Sarah Darling. But I mean, he had a chance to get New Kids on the Block, but it didn't happen. Like, there's some really neat side stories. And John's just been immersed in that business for 25 years. So it was a great book. I'm looking forward to everybody's feedback on that one when it comes out. It'll be out in the spring. I think we have an official date. I think it's April 6th or something like that. But you know how it goes. They're out earlier than that.
Right.
Now a lot of the modern fans who weren't around in '91, you really have to understand, Rick, as you can attest, pre-pandemic, there was such a big culture of conventions and meet and greets.
Yeah. Yep.
John was one of the first guys doing that kind of stuff. So he really cultivated that culture. She kind of planted the seed for that culture, I should say.
But a lot of that came out of his baseball. right? He'd been to baseball
Yeah.
conventions. He was a big baseball fan. He still raves about Eddie Kranepool being his favorite Met ever. So all those things sort of paid off in the sense that he ran these conventions, but he certainly didn't make a lot of money on them. The things have changed a lot. I mean, he was charging, a couple of bucks an autograph back then. And, Sting at the first one didn't charge at all.
Wow.
And Bruno refused to ever sign for money. So, again, things have changed. But, I mean, we could have done a whole big book just about his wrestling stuff. But his whole life, his ups and his downs, makes it a better read, I think, than just sticking with the wrestling stuff, which is why he's got the podcast, right? The podcast tells you all the little minutia and the stories that go on. And Brian Last does a great job prompting him a little bit and poking him and getting John to tell some good stories.
Yeah. That's one I'm really looking forward to. You mentioned like people didn't really charge much for autographs back then, or people didn't charge at all. I remember on his podcast he talked about his first convention. I think Backlund was only charging $5 for an autograph. It's so crazy to think about now because people are charging like minimum 15 or 20 to like even higher, like really crazy amounts these days. So it's just funny to think about. The convention circuit has definitely changed, especially the autograph, the meet and greets. So tell me about Slam Wrestling. You guys, I'm showing that it was established in 1997. What brought you into creating this this site?
Well, long story short, I was one of those kids in the 80s that got run over by Hulkamania. And it coincided with us getting an Apple IIe computer, and we got a publishing program. So I started doing a wrestling newsletter. So that was where wrestling sort of bit me, and the Canadian Wrestling Report ran for 5 years. I stopped when I went to journalism school, and I had a few wrestling friends and stuff, but I didn't really keep up with that much. I got a job at the Toronto Sun newspaper. The internet happened. And while the internet was really starting off in 1996, that coincides with, the Monday Night Wars. And everything's starting to take off on the second level of cable television, right? The second boom of cable television.
Right. Yep.
And so Canoe.ca was the website for the entire Sun Media newspaper chain. And they ran the Bret Hart's column in the Calgary Sun, and later Cyrus. Don Callis had a column in the Winnipeg Sun. There were also wrestling columns in the Ottawa and Toronto Sun. So we already had automatic wrestling content. So John Powell and I just created Slam Wrestling and built it out from there. And right from the get-go, it was a hit. It was easily one of the best traffic parts of the site. We were with Sun Media for 23 years. And then earlier this year, in I guess it was April, not long after the pandemic, they decided to cut some costs, and so they cut us. And so that led to slamwrestling.net and Off on Our Own, which has been full of challenges, but it's been a lot of fun, and you certainly learn who your friends are,
Right.
when these things happen, right? And, you miss the protection of the bigger company, and certainly the guaranteed income was nice, but we're trying on our own, and we still do the same great content as far as I'm concerned. It was complicated by the fact that we owned the rights to our content. So anything that was not Sun Media, we owned. So we had to figure out a way to import 23 years worth of stories. I think we imported 7,500 stories, quickly whittled them down, because we didn't really want to keep those old TV reports. And then in the end, there was about 4,500 stories that are now live on the site. So it was a lot of work just getting those all and putting them in WordPress, all that stuff. So
He left again. So you were involved in a movie not so long ago, or the Sweet Daddy Siki movie. How did that come about? You helped write the documentary?
Well, part of it is the fact that you get to know people with pro wrestling, right? You make friends, you make contacts. The Megan brothers, Gianna Page, helped me run 6 different Titans in Toronto dinners, which were all fundraisers for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. They were aspiring filmmakers, and they're the guys behind the Iron Sheik documentary.
Excellent.
Just called The Sheik, right? So they're the nephews, even though if they're not legally the nephews. They consider him Uncle Sheik. And so I'm in that movie. I was sort of a little bit of a consultant on that in the sense that they would run things by me. But there was nothing official. They always wanted to do a Sweet Daddy Siki movie. And they knew the only way that was going to happen would be if he gave in. Because Siki's a really private guy. And I was one of the few that had his trust. A good example, going back to what we talked about earlier, the internet was so new, and he had no clue what it meant. He would call me up and say, Greg, can you take off my name across the internet wherever it says me and Ron Hutchison? Because he didn't work with him on the training anymore. So yeah, I'm right across the internet. Yeah, that'd be really easy to do. But Siki trusted me, so he would call me with those kind of requests. And our friendship grew through the years to the point that when these guys got actual funding and put sort of the plan together, I was the conduit to make it happen with Siki. And then to get the actual funding, you have to have a script to hand in. In this case, it was to the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, their documentary division. And so I wrote up a script, and I'm credited as the writer, but in reality, documentaries don't really work like that, right? So much of it depends on what you find and what you get access to. But a great example, my favorite part of the movie is Siki singing with Charlie Pride.
Right.
And that was my idea. I said, hey, look, Charlie Pride's coming nearby. Can we get him? And the producer, Jeremy Michel, went out and lined it all up. And so I wrote up my questions. Here's what to ask Charlie Pride, including the other sports reference was baseball, right? He used to be a co-owner of the Texas Rangers. So they got to go down, and Siki and him singing together was just magical. So you never know where things are going to go with a documentary. And that's the best part, right? You know, when we finally got Edge, great. We got Bret Hart, George Chuvalo. These were all sort of expected guys, but then you guys have seen it, right? There's a lot of talking heads, historical people that kind of talk about the African-American, African-Canadian experiences. And really tries to add a lot of context, which I think is pretty rare for a lot of wrestling documentaries.
Andy.
I did want to comment, too. Another thing that made it stand out to me is you came up with some excellent footage. Like, the quality was outstanding from that.
Well, the black and white stuff is the Dumont Network. So WWE doesn't own that. That's owned by a archival librarian system in Chicago. And again, I didn't have to go and hunt down, but I certainly knew where some of it was. And then some of the other footage wasn't quite as good. The stuff from Atlantic Grand Prix or the Bearman stuff, but that added in some ways to the vintageness of it, right? It's like, oh yeah, I remember what TV was like back then, because we're so spoiled in this world of HD and instant streaming. To see that old stuff was it warms the heart, right?
Yeah.
I had heard of Sweet Daddy Siki. Okay, I'm 47 years old, so I didn't really see him, And I lived in New York, right? So he didn't come around in New York in the 80s. When I heard about this documentary, I said, you know what? I remember seeing pictures of this guy. I'll give it a shot. So the documentary, you can ask Rick. I started blowing Rick's phone up. I started texting everybody I know saying, listen, I don't care if you're a wrestling fan or not. You got to check out this documentary. If this guy came along in this era, or if he came even in the last 20 years, 30 years, he would have been a mega superstar.
I'd like to think so. But again, sometimes you're the product of the times, right? And his mixed marriage was part of the downfall, as you saw in the documentary. And married a white woman, and though it's not overt, and nobody said, hey, you can't work for us anymore because you married a white woman, he got pushed down the cards. And so it's actually kind of similar to the Billy Van project I talked about, where Billy Van was in the U.S., was a big Hollywood guy, and then just stopped, just left. It wasn't worth it for him to be in Hollywood. He just went back home to Toronto and stuck around. So Siki did the same thing. He ended up homesteading out of Toronto. He'd still work, especially out east, but he was able to do his country music and travel around and still be an iconic figure. Same thing. He's he's hosted a karaoke down at the Duke Tavern in the East End of Toronto for like over 25 years. And I know it kills him to be home with COVID and not being out doing it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. He seemed like quite the charming man in the documentary, like his personality. He just seemed like he was really cool and just outgoing. I'd like to check out his music. I only heard what I heard in the documentary.
I would say, actually, Rick, that it's the opposite. He's not outgoing in person. He's kind of protective, and until he gets to know you, right? Yeah. So he's not like he's a gregarious person. I don't think I'd ever use that word with Siki. He's pretty protective, but you get to know him over time, and he can be pretty good. But he definitely has that charisma, right? Yeah. When he turns it on, like when he's out doing the karaoke or whatever, everybody's laughing, having a great time. And that's what the real greats have, right? That they have that charisma. And to Andy's point, he probably could have been a star. Maybe not in the WWE world where they're also, scripted and all that kind of thing. But I understand what you mean. Yeah, today I think he could still do it.
Greg, another question too is in the film, I didn't really get the sense he was open about any bitterness he had from being a black man in the industry in those years. But in personal conversations, did he ever express any bitterness? He just seemed kind of go with the flow with it all.
I don't know. I think he really looks at how lucky he was. And it's not really played up enough in the documentary, but he hitched his wagon to Buddy Rogers. And Buddy Rogers had his posse. He had his guys that traveled around town to town, Billy Darnell, all those kind of guys, Johnny Brand. And Siki was one of those guys that was trusted to be a part of that. So once he was, he was really lucky. That he got pushed down the cards and had to leave and go to Toronto was fine. He made his own friends. He became close with the Bearman McKigney, worked a lot of those summer tours. I don't think he's a guy that really dwells on all the negativity. Look at his upbringing. If he sat around and just thought about how sad it was, it'd be crazy. In fact, since the documentary, I was talking to his son the other day. They've learned about even more. Like Siki had another sibling that he didn't know about, like that had died even younger. So there's all kinds of craziness. Just families at the time in poverty in Texas. It all adds up to being quite the story. And he's always talked about doing a book, but I think it's a little too late now because his. I wouldn't say his mind's going, but his mind's not as sharp as it certainly was even 10 years ago.
Now, when I did see the documentary, Greg, you were actually one of the first people I reached out to, too, on Messenger, asking you about Siki and asking you about merchandise or personal appearances. Is there any movement in that direction? Because I would kill to have a Siki autograph picture. I'd kill for that.
Yeah.
We talked about it. Everything's sort of happened so fast. With the Billy Van book came a little bit earlier than I thought it was going to come. And but I've talked to Siki and I talked to his son. And that's our plan is we're going to do a limited signing. He doesn't like to travel outside of his apartment. So it'll be sort of his son taking in a bunch of choice of photos. And we'll do something like that and mail them out. I'm certainly getting used to mailing out a lot of stuff at the moment with all these books here. Right. So I don't think it'll be that much of a stretch. He doesn't actually live too far from me here in Toronto. So we are going to make it happen. It'll probably be early in the new year.
Okay. And another question I have for you too. Did Christian ever make good on his dues?
I think he probably did, but I don't know for sure. But that's the kind of guy Siki is, right? Like he thinks that's funny, and to give a little dig like that. I've talked to Jay in a long time. He's one of those guys, you'd see them come up to Toronto and you'd known them for years, so you'd have a little chat. But he doesn't really have much reason to come up here. So I haven't talked to him in a while. But Adam, I hear from occasionally. Adam Copeland. I once saw him in a bar, and I have a notepad somewhere that says Sexton Hardcastle could be good if ceiling was higher. So I think I was on the right line there.
I just want to ask about Siki working in Memphis. It says he wasn't there very long, right? Probably 1985. So he was pretty much towards the end of his career, correct? When did he retire ultimately?
Really, it was when the Bearman died, so 1988. He was scheduled to be on that tour out in Newfoundland where Adrian Adonis and Pat Kelly died with Bearman McKinney. So he was scheduled to go there, and he and Willie the Wolfman Farkas never wrestled again after that, I don't think. Wow. It was just, that was the end. Like, there's no way they wanted to go through any of that. Wrestling was done for them.
All right. Andy, do you have anything else, sir?
One other question, too, because it's like, I tell people, again, even if they're not wrestling fans, I know I sound redundant here, but I preach, you got to see this documentary just for the man's struggle with racism as a human being. Like, it was such a fast-moving documentary. It was about 75 minutes or so. Are there any extras? Will we see a director's cut at any point? Because I want more. I want so much more.
I want it remixed a little bit with the music a little later, too. But, you know, but that's whatever. I wasn't the director. Harv Glazer was the director, and he's done a lot of different things. And, you know, I wasn't really a part of that finished process in a way, but I was there with Harv asking the questions a lot of the time. And he picked and chose what he wanted and wove through it. There's all kinds of stuff. I mean, we interviewed Darlene Love. Didn't even make the cut.
Okay.
You know, she didn't know Siki, so you sort of wanted the African-American entertainer experience, but it didn't really end up being relevant. There's certainly a lot more on, you know, Bret Hart and George Savallo and all those different guys when they spent a lot of time with us. There's a whole fan section we never used.
Oh, wow.
We did a Titans in Toronto dinner. It was the last one we did, and we honored Siki at it. So Siki was there with his whole family. Rocky Johnson was there, and all kinds of fans. So we interviewed, you know, these people who'd watched Siki for years, and interviewed them. So all that stuff exists and has never been used. So I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do with it, but I certainly understand that, Andy, and I'd love to see some of the stuff we did. Because I was there for some of it, but others I wasn't. So I'm curious what we have.
I'd like to see that Darlene Love interview because I'm a fan of hers. I saw her in concert a couple of years back. So
jealous.
From New Haven, Connecticut, they host big concerts for free, you know, in the center of town every year. Well, obviously not this past year, but she was one of the headline attractions one year. And it's phenomenal performer. Yeah,
absolutely. And I love that Little Steven's done a little bit to revitalize her career and released her first single album. You know, like, it's crazy.
I have that album. I have it on vinyl, actually, the one that came out a couple years back, or probably 6 years old by now. But, you know, that's a great record. And he did a lot of writing on that, but talking the Underground Garage right now, so we're getting off topic once again.
But so, even the Siki stuff, back to the Siki and the music, though, we didn't explore the fact that he's on there talking about that 145 he did when he's on the Dumont Network, which is a pop record. Right. And then later we talk about his music, you know, and all this country. But like that whole transition was never really explored. I mean, it's really hard to do that, but obviously he went through that at some point. He changed up what he wanted to sing about. And obviously he grew up with country. So that was a natural fit for him, but he tried to do a pop record. And some of those are really hard to find. And also the other fascinating thing is he's hardly the only, you know, wrestler to be involved with music. At Slam Wrestling, we have a whole music section where we've talked to a number of those people over the years. You know, whether it's the High Crusade, which is like Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin and Petey Williams have a band. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of different connections like that you don't always know. And even the Charlie Pride piece I wrote up is in that section. So there's a lot more to it, and I look hopefully down the road I can write about, you know, Tony Parisi and his opera days and Frank Townsend and his crooning. Like, there's all kinds of stuff out there in music, and it's barely scratched the surface.
PN News.
PN News. Well, that's a different kind of music.
Speaking of which, talking about one thing.
Rap and all that. Oh yeah, that's a different one. Yeah.
I have an album I showed Andy over the summer that he's never seen. From the 80s on Rhino Records, the Wrestling Rocks album. Have you ever seen that?
Is that the I think I have. So it's got is it Jerry Lawler on it and
Jerry Lawler, you guys like that? Yeah. It's hanging up. I think it's right there, right next to Muda, in the corner. I have that. It's a pretty interesting record. It's got, like, cartoon pictures of like Baron von Raschke and Mil Mascaras on there and stuff like that. It's a pretty interesting record. I don't play it, that's why it's hanging up. So,
well, I do. But it's also what you like collecting, right? And some people are into music, and some people are into this, and
I work in a record.
Some people like the figures, so
Yeah, I work in a record store, so I have easy access to a lot of that stuff. I found that there, so I'm gonna have to look for that Charlie Pride stuff. I mean, the Siki stuff. Charlie Pride stuff I got tons of there, but I don't think I've ever seen the Siki stuff there.
I've only seen a couple of albums that he's done. I think there's 3 that are actually out there and a couple of singles, but they're tough to find. So hunt away.
Yeah. All right, Andy. Do you have anything else before we wrap it up?
No, but I think we should just let people know that if you're interested in what we're talking about here, the Sweet Daddy Siki documentary, it is available on Amazon Prime. If you're a member, no charge. Check it out. Best 5 minutes of your life. Well, maybe not the best, but damn close to it. So even if you're not a wrestling fan,
Andy, I do need to clarify. It's on Amazon outside of Canada. Amazon Prime outside of Canada.
Sorry.
In Canada, CBC still owns the rights, so it stays on the CBC documentary channel. It comes up pretty regularly there. I think they had a 5-year window, so I think it's got a couple more years to run there. And then slamwrestling.net is, of course, my home there, and oliverbooks.ca is where you find all the wrestling books I've done. So, and the hockey books and the kids' books and stuff. It's been a fun ride for sure.
Actually, before you go, can you tell me a little bit about the kids' books? That's the one thing I want to know. Andy, I think, was interested in that as well. Like, what's
it's more his reading level? Is that what you're saying?
We both have small. Hey, he has a thing for bringing. He has a thing for saying stuff like that to me. So it's my it's my turn. No, I mean we both have small kids, so I was interested in that, and I know Andy was as well. And
I was really lucky. So I was a stay-at-home dad from the time my son was 1, and basically I took him everywhere. So if we were going, I didn't take him to meet John Cena when I did a John Cena interview. I left him with my sister-in-law there. But he met a ton of wrestlers. I mean, Rick Martel. We went to pick up Rick Martel once to take him to the Titans dinner. And Rick and Chris and Quinn, my son, was in the car and got a Rick Martel figure. Kurgan came over for dinner once. So, we had all these different experiences where he met all these wrestlers. And then there's all the hockey. I took him out of school once to go meet Bobby Orr at a Canada Post stamp launch.
That's awesome.
So he saw all this stuff, and he saw me writing, and eventually we just sort of sat down together. It's like, you got an idea for a book? And he came up with, it was called Duck with the Puck, and it was based on his favorite stuffy called Big Ducky, and so it's about a duck who loves to play hockey. I can't wait for winter to come along and be able to play. I'm talking about magical moments, right? You get to go with your son on NHL network radio. You get to go on breakfast television and have those moments that he's in the spotlight and you're sort of there. And then I did a second kid's book called Santa's Day Job, which is sort of about what Santa does the rest of the year. And it's like a lot of things that happen to writers, right? You get the idea, you make some notes, and you never get back to it. But I had a couple of my son's friends who kept asking me about it because they had pitched a couple of the ideas. So eventually I got around to, I self-published both of those. But certainly this latest Billy Van one is a much bigger scale as far as self-publishing, and cost and all that. So it's been a really great experience. And my son's not really into me anymore. He's a teenager, he's 14. So I'm happy if he spends any time with me at all these days. But we did have that time together for sure.
That's awesome. All right. So is there anything else you want to push, sir?
Oh, those are good. I'm getting used to the pushes, right? So, yeah. No, I appreciate all these things and all the podcasts that are out there. And the Sweet Daddy Siki documentary was a lot of fun to work on. And it was a great entree to be on your show, guys.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.